Hello, welcome back to Knowing Use with me, Michael Foran. My guest today was Ronan McCrae, Professor of Law at University College London. Ronan has recently written a fantastic book called The End of the Gay Rights Revolution, which poses some pretty important and I think actually quite foundational challenges to the modern gay rights movement. In our talk, we had a wide-ranging discussion about both gay rights and also the incidentally related rights of trans people, those protected under characteristics like gender reassignment, or those who express transgender identities. And the central theme of our discussion was effectively to question why the gay rights and trans rights movement have come to the point that they are at the moment. Are they under threat, and why? And we posit that one possible explanation for this is the revolutionary move within both gay rights activism and trans rights activism, which are potentially undermining some of the claims and successes that were made in both politics and law by more mainstream forms of political activism. So I hope you enjoy the chat, and we'll get right to it. So, what was the gay rights revolution?
The gay rights revolution was an incidental side effect of the straight sexual revolution. I think that's the key. The gay rights revolution was not about gay people. And I think it's, as you get older in life, you realise that things aren't about you. And I think gay people need to realise that. The world did not realise it loved gay people. Mm-hmm. The straight world, which is 96% of the population, who will realistically, with those numbers, always determine the broader sexual culture. They changed. They gave themselves cohabitation, premarital sex, abortion, contraception, and having established for themselves a paradigm based on choice and freedom, they had to be they'd be prodded to reluctantly give to gay people the same freedom. That's how gay rights came about. It was, and in the book, what I call it is, it's like Estonian independence. Yeah, people fought hard for it, but Estonia was never getting free unless the USSR had collapsed. Yeah, and same for gay rights.
Yeah, although I think with Estonia, we already have this kind of shared framework of determination of states and conditions that might be met, that international law or the politics around that didn't think Estonia as a state was precluded from, and so when the conditions arose for that to happen, Estonian independence happens as a result of it, and it's recognised internationally because these shared expectations for what you would do when those fact patterns arise were met. Whereas I think for gay rights, you really do need to establish that the conditions of non-discrimination have been met. You know, gay people have to be sufficiently like straight people in order for the denial of the things that have been given to straight people to become politically salient. So I wonder, is it the case that there's an additional thing happening here as well, which is a gradual breakdown of social or cultural expectation of difference between gays and straights?
So I think you're right that gay people had to become recognised as sufficiently similar to some degree that even for sexual autonomy arguments to work. But it is interesting, like if you look in the US, in the challenge to anti-sodomy statutes, in Barrett and Hardwick, when the majority rejected in 1986 the claim that criminalising sex between men was unconstitutional, they did it on the basis that there is no constitutional right to sodomy. Mm-hmm. And then in 2003, in Lawrence v. Texas, when the court changed its mind, they did it on the basis that there is a general right to sexual freedom. Mm-hmm. So equality arguments, I think now they get quite far, but for most, until really, really very recent past, equality arguments were not a good argument for gay rights. For gay rights, it started with autonomy, and I think once the autonomy allowed gay people to live openly and people realised that they knew gay people, they liked them, people were in their families, then equality started to get some traction But I think it started with freedom and then came.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I
later.
don't mean equality in the sense of like an anti-discrimination
Right.
commitment. Maybe what I mean is a universal value. So something like sexual freedom or autonomy, where it becomes almost arbitrary at that point to say, we think this thing called sexual autonomy is a value that our law or our society wants to recognize and protect. And now the onus is on the people who want to confine that to heterosexual couples to justify confining it in that way, because we've already accepted this expansive understanding. Whereas, before the sexual revolution, people weren't thinking that sexual autonomy was a good thing for everyone, and therefore everyone should have it.
Yeah, the burden of proof flipped in a way, because the default for straight people before the sexual revolution was sex is default forbidden, and it's only really within marriage, presumed heterosexual marriage at the time. And then the sexual revolution changed that. The default position is you can do what you want unless it's hurting someone.
Yeah.
And then once that's the paradigm, then how do it becomes much harder to say to gay people.
So it's very much a liberal framework, or an expansion from a more socially conservative way of thinking about sexuality. And then in that sense, gay rights are this kind of Estonian independence offshoot of that. That once the sexual revolution approaches sexuality and the framework within which the law regulates sexuality from a default of liberalism and autonomy, then the political movement for gay rights becomes something that is just a natural consequence of that.
Yeah, it's hard. It becomes very hard to resist. Now, some places still have resisted that because there are countries where, it's even interesting when you look at places like Russia now. There's very high divorce rates, very high abortion rates, but gay is still taboo. So some people do manage to pull off the hypocrisy, but it gets harder.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are the main gains of the gay rights revolution then? What are the big changes that happen from before this revolution?
So, I think the main gain is flourishing, that people now recognize that many people recognize that it is a more flourishing life for gay people not to embrace their desires and seek to have relationships rather than to restrict them. And I think the view now, if people, like a person in secular Western society who is seeking to master or deny their same-sex desires is seen as engaging in kind of pointless suffering. Now, I think for much of the world that doesn't seem pointless, because if you really strongly believe in certain religious beliefs or other beliefs, it's not pointless. But to us, in a secular society that values freedom, that seems pointless. So and that is, instinctively to me, I see gay people having fulfilling relationships and also not suffering from the kind of self-hatred that really was so endemic, even quite recently.
Now we have different reasons to hate ourselves.
And they're largely, our fate is in our own hands. Yeah. And actually, I think that is a really great feeling, that if you think of a young gay person coming to maturity in any era up to the kind of 1990s or 2000s, their chance of a happy, flourishing life had been really taken away from them in advance. In the book I use the analogy of, they said the cricket, Sir Geoffrey Howe said about Margaret Thatcher negotiating with the EU, when the man came up to play cricket and stepped up to the crease, he found the team captain had broken the bats before the match began. And that was the same. Gay people, their life was ruined in advance, and that's great. It's great that people don't grow up with the same sense of feeling shamed and of themselves. I was kind of slightly cringe at the love is love and all that slogans, but more love in the world isn't a bad thing.
Yeah.
More companionship, more these are all good things.
Yeah. Well, I wonder if it would be useful for us to walk through some of the timeline on this, because I think a lot of people who are kind of under the age of 30, let's say 25 or below now, I think they'd be shocked to think how late some of this seems to have come. I mean, in Ireland, sodomy laws were decriminalised in 1993. Yeah, it was a year before I was born. You know, we get anti-discrimination protections not until and in the UK, that's, you know, the early 2000s.
Yeah.
And, you know, the UK had gender reassignment discrimination protections for almost a decade before we had sexual orientation discrimination protections. You know, and marriage doesn't come until about a decade ago. These seem quite late, actually, in compared to where we are now, in terms of, it just seems completely unthinkable that 30 years ago you could be imprisoned for having sex.
Or like, I graduated in 2001. There was not one openly gay undergraduate law student when I did my LLB, and there were, 500 students? You know, it was just, people, the main thing I always think is people don't realise how they used to think. Yeah. I'd always bump into people who I knew growing up who weren't homophobic in a particular way, like notable way, but they were. I remember because I was listening. They were said awful things, and it was just the social water we swam in. Gay was shameful. Gay was embarrassing. Gays, you know. I mean, I start the book with an anecdote about how I was a ball boy in a tournament, and this famous tennis player kind of mocked me for being gay in front of the crowd, and the most liberal newspaper in Ireland wrote that up as wasn't a really fun occasion. You know, people don't remember how they used to think.
Do you think opinion has changed significantly in the last 20 years, 30 years?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think it could change back really quickly.
Okay.
So I think it's like going bankrupt slowly then quickly. So what happens is these things reach a tipping point. Then most people just take their cues from wider society, and then when wider society is telling them gay people are awful, they'll go with that. And they say, well, sure, why is there a problem with that? We'll go with that too. But those people, they move en masse. That's why I think that's why people find it so hard to remember how they used to feel, because there is a kind of stampede once you reach the tipping point, that and because actually it's not normally the result of conscious reflection. Yeah. People just take their cues from society and they follow. They don't sit down and think, gosh, am I going to change my views? They're not thinking about gay people most of the time. Yeah. They're just following. So I think that makes it really hard for people to remember how they used to feel. And I think that means we've had a total victory, but it also means that things could change back much more quickly than we think.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking about some of this is like US politics more so than UK politics, but, you know, in 2008 presidential election, both Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton were adamantly anti same-sex marriage. And they were wildly popular because of that. And it wasn't until, I think, 2013.
And they scooped up the whole gay vote. Because people thought gay people were right, that's as good as we're going to get.
Yeah. Yeah. And it wasn't until like 2013, I think, when they started to change their position on that. I mean, that is, these people they're not dinosaurs. They're still in many ways active within American politics. And they're seen to be on the more kind of liberal or progressive end of things. So I think people have just forgotten how radical the change has been in the last kind of 20 or 30 years.
It's changing pretty quickly now. Like 3 years ago, 56% of Republicans in the US were in favour of gay marriage. It's now 41%. So things are already going back. And, because I don't think Donald Trump, he went to Studio 54 and he was in the 80s in New York. And so I think he isn't that pushed about gay people. But most of the people around him and the MAGA movement are really not very pro-gay at all, and actually see it, or certainly see LGBTQ plus, and they put gay rights into that as one of the key things they want to oppose. Yeah. So I think things could change quite quickly. So,
I mean, that's basically the warning in the book, isn't it? Is that we're maybe a question mark at the end of it, the end of the gay rights revolution, question mark. I mean, do you think we're at the end?
Yeah, I think we're at the end, certainly in this period of what looked like inexorable advances. I also think that the revolutionary approach will hasten the end of of what we've achieved. So that's kind of the both. If we stick with the revolutionary approach, the revolution will fall.
Right. And do you think it was I mean, let's maybe unpack what we mean by the revolutionary approach. What's the alternative to it?
Right.
And which of these, I mean, there's an argument to be had here that the revolutionary approach has never succeeded. That the revolutionary approach is like Estonia. That in fact it was the more mainstream approach that had all these gains, and then the downstream effect has been that the revolutionary zeitgeist within the gay rights movement took all the credit. But what was the revolutionary approach?
So, I mean, I think right from the start, there's always been tension in the gay rights movement between the people who said, the gay rights movement is part of a movement that aims at overturning all norms around sex, gender, family, relationships, all that stuff. It's part of a general revolutionary movement. Some bits even got into kind of overthrowing capitalism. But even if you take that bit out, overthrowing all established norms. All norms are suspect. Ongoing revolutionary change. And then the other group, we said, we have no quarrel with the system in general. We just think the system needs to be tweaked to stop punishing people who are same-sex attracted. Don't fire us. Recognize our relationships legally, and don't put us in prison for having sex. That's it.
Yeah.
You can the rest of the edifice of societal norms around sex, gender, family can remain in place. Just tweak for us.
Yeah.
So it's always, and the two, right at the start there was a big burst of very early. There were very perhaps overly apologetic gay rights groups in the 1950s, early 60s. Early 70s, there's a burst of radicalism. The Gay Liberation Front wants to overturn all norms. The 80s and 90s, it gets more conservative, employment protections, relationship recognition, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then mid-2010s, once all that's been won, the normies disengage from the movement and the radicals take over again, and they say, no, it's LGBTQ plus. It's part of this wider challenging of all norms.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of, you can see it's gone up and down over time. But the revolutionary thing is to say, it's not just about gay rights. Gay rights is part of a general challenge to all established norms.
The omni-cause.
The omni-cause.
I mean, it's certainly the case that if you're looking at that trajectory that you've painted there, the revolutionary element of this has never been successful.
No.
I mean, if you look at, this strong movement although to be fair, so you've got like this movement in the 50s, that's less revolutionary.
Yes.
And that's around the time that we see, the UK decriminalise
Yes.
homosexuality or homosexual sex. And then you get this shift towards radicalism and gay rights stall, and we don't get anything else until a more conservative bent or a more approach to advocacy that's less focused on overturning everything, but just expanding the circle of what's already there.
And I mean, I suppose to be fair to Steelman, you would say, well, how much progress probably would have been made in the early 70s anyway, when people were so hostile? Because I think when decriminalisation occurs, it needed a time that gave space for gay people to live a little more openly, and then that desensitizes people to gay homosexuality. And I always feel, in some ways, sorry is the wrong word, but people used to laugh at conservatives or anti-gay people who were saying kind of having a gay character on television is a disaster, and it made people look really kind of petty.
Yeah.
But actually that stuff does really matter, because when the reason everyone was homophobic when I was a kid in Ireland was not just the laws, it's because no one knew anyone gay.
Yeah.
And they thought they didn't know them, and they'd never come across it, and the first time you see something it's always a bit shocking. And then when they kind of realised, oh, my uncle is gay, or the guy I work with is gay, or the woman I work with is lesbian, it just desensitizes people, and then they get much more.
Yeah.
And they did show, which actually I think is interesting, not always the case now in relation to trans issues, that the more someone knows a gay person, it increased their support for gay rights.
Yeah. So. But I mean, I suppose the point I'd be thinking about here is if you look at where we've got the successes.
Yes.
So the cultural successes is things like gay characters on TV shows that then lead to greater understanding of gay people.
Yes.
I mean, even if you're looking at that, I mean, I don't think we would have had a downstream positive effect if the gay characters that were put on TV shows in the 80s and the 90s were openly having orgies every weekend and were saying down with your heteronormative marriage contract, fuck you all kind of thing.
And it's not about not firing me.
Yeah.
It's about removing all of your norms.
Exactly. I demand that you give me a baby now.
It was.
But the way that it succeeds is by saying, look, gay people are just like everybody else. They love the way that we love. They want to have, loving, monogamous relationships. They want to, they're just like your uncle. They're just like your friends and your family. They're normal.
Yes.
And that tactic works in the litigation front as well. Yeah. So we've mentioned a bit about the contemporary issues about trans and gender issues. I mean, trans rights, at least in Europe, came before gay rights, and part of that was because the push that was being had for birth certificates was tied to a push for heterosexual marriage, and it was an argument to say, the Goodwin case that establishes in the UK. In European Convention of Human Rights law, a violation from the UK for failing to recognise Goodwin's acquired gender, was tied predominantly to marriage, in the sense that the European Court of Human Rights said it is obviously within the margin of discretion for the UK to not have gay marriage, but it's outside of the UK's margin of discretion to not allow post-operative transsexuals to marry as their post-operative gender. So you get this move is done by hitching onto an existing social institution heterosexual marriage and not trying to say, by the way, we also demand gay marriage. There's no push from the trans rights movement to say, unless you bring gay rights along, we're not taking our rights.
And they're right to do it. They need to get the result they wanted. They're right. They're entitled to aim for that, and they shouldn't have hostaged their win to bringing along what was at that time an impossible case.
Yeah,
and also because, both gay rights movements and I think trans movements, if they're smart, engage what you were talking about earlier, saying is cost reduction for their opponents. Say, look, it doesn't cost much to accommodate me.
Yeah.
Gay people, either they'll live quite normal lives, or to the degree that they're very divergent sexual norms, it'll be done privately.
Well, this was the thing. Even if you look at something like Lawrence in Texas, there's a really interesting anthropological framework of thinking about this, because the way that case was presented in terms of the paperwork that went to the courts, Lawrence, the man who was subject to criminal sanction for engaging in sodomy, it was presented as if this was a loving, committed, monogamous union, that these had been together for a decade. And the reality now reported, obviously, is that he was engaged in, casual, anonymous sex. He was in a car park with someone he'd met in the car park. But that's all scrubbed from the picture in order to sanitize the claim. In order so that the claim can fit into this narrative that gay people are just like everybody else, and that's the thing that succeeds in Lawrence. If Lawrence had said, no, I demand the right not just to keep the state out of my bedroom at home, I need to be able to have public sex with strangers in parks, somehow I don't think we would have had the same success.
Or imagining the gay marriage referendum in Ireland, if they said, oh, we want gay marriage, and also it doesn't have to be monogamous. They'd lose. And campaigns are all political campaigning involves kind of putting a slightly sanitized version forward. So it's fine that they did it, but I think you're right. I think it's really instructive that activist groups who now say, oh no, it doesn't matter, you have to kind of own everything and overturn all norms. That's never how they've campaigned. We've always been aware that gay people, 3, 4, 5% of the population, rely on the majority. We need to keep them on side, and that means convincing them that accommodating us doesn't cost much. It doesn't require overturning everything. And the more we insist it does, the more vulnerable our rights will be.
Yeah, and I suppose, I mean, one of the things that you can draw out from this is that we didn't get these rights by being revolutionary.
No.
We got these rights by being basically holding a mirror up to society and saying, we want you to extend your existing norms to us because we're just like you. And that has succeeded both legally and at a political level when you've been able to make arguments that are not revolutionary in the sense of tearing everything down. And it seems like what happens that is one of the causes that leads to what you're seeing as the end of the gay rights revolution is the retreat from the stance that was necessary to make those wins. Right. And then, I mean, so if you think about, like, since the big win of marriage, I mean, has there been any other win for gay rights?
Well, I'm not sure that, I mean, I'm sure people, it's a controversial view, but I don't think there were any more wins to get. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think once gay sex is decriminalized, once you can't be fired for being gay, once you have adequate relationship recognition, I actually think that the war was over. And sure, you need there might be some work to do about bullying in schools and social attitudes, and there's most of the world still doesn't have those gay rights recognized. But I don't think there's anything else to get, because people, and I think that's hard for activists. I think no one was acting cynically, but I think subconsciously that's partly why there's been expansion in the agenda, because you fought this fight, you've had a thrilling victory, it's given you camaraderie, it's given you meaning, it's given you sometimes a paying job, and it's over. And that's a bit of a sad recognition. Yeah. And I think that's partly why people allowed themselves to think that it was urgent to expand the agenda, because it's hard. Getting what you want in life is really hard, as people often find out.
Although, I mean, I think there clearly was an agenda that was ripe for the taking that would probably just not be the most popular or even, very exciting thing to do for people who are used to campaigning within the West, which was to say, we've won all the things that we can feasibly win in Western Europe or America. Now it's time to become an international gay rights movement and try and push for things in different contexts. Now, I think there's two big challenges to that. The first is that the way you get these wins in the West is by not being revolutionary to the norms that were existing at the time. And so it may be that there just wasn't a viable mechanism by which you could just impose a Western framework of gay rights. So that if you were going to try to be effective in bringing decriminalization or other kinds of developments in gay rights in other cultures or in other countries, the effective way to do that would be to think about how these claims fit within an existing culture and to argue from within that culture rather than trying to overthrow
I think it's been very damaging. The perception that Western rights is a gay imposition is really hurt gay rights movements in Africa and elsewhere. And you do it's also it's very unfair on them, but the degree of success in the West has made it much harder elsewhere, because if in 1967, when the House of Commons was discussing partial decriminalisation of sex between men, if the proposer of the bill had stood up and said, now this is just the first step in a road that ends in gay marriage, the bill wouldn't have got through. But unfortunately, say if you were trying to propose decriminalisation in Nigeria or somewhere now, if the cat's out of the bag, they know that's what happened in the West. Step. So it's very hard for them to say, no, we just want decriminalisation, nothing more. So our success has made it harder for them. And then additionally, by radicalising and telling people that LGBTQ plus, it's a movement that requires change in all norms, we've made it harder again. But it is true, I'm not saying we shouldn't have gone for gay marriage, but the reality is that getting it in the West will make it harder to get going in other places.
Yeah, and so what you've seen instead is what were formerly gay rights charities and groups and organisations, they pivot. And what we've seen the main pivot be in the UK and the US. I'm sure it's happened elsewhere, but I'm not as familiar with other jurisdictions.
I mean, certainly ILGA across Europe, it's completely...
So the huge shift is to stop focusing on rights that are grounded in sexual orientation and to move into rights that are grounded in gender identity.
Yes.
And I think, one of the things that happens with that is a rewriting of history to frame it as if these campaigns have been walking in lockstep since the very start. And this is not a pivot. It's, we've had these two groups, these two campaigns that have been working hand in hand, and we happen to get the win first. So now it is incumbent upon the people who are supportive of gay rights to turn to, not pull the lather up and to continue the campaign. Now, I suspect you're probably in agreement with me that these campaigns did not walk hand in hand, and that in fact the trans rights campaign had significant wins way before the gay rights campaign.
In European law, definitely. I mean, EU law, as we both know, P&S versus Cornwall Council, the European Court of Justice says discrimination on grounds of gender reassignment is illegal under EU law in 1995, I think it is. In 1997, in Grant versus Southwest Trains, the court explicitly rejects that sexual orientation is a protected characteristic in terms of EU anti-discrimination law. Changed legislatively later on, but that took till 2003. So in that case, and as you said, Goodwin, the right of a trans woman to marry a man, recognised 2002 when 2 countries in the world had gay marriage. So in some instances, gay trans rights have come ahead of gay rights. And like who got there first and ways secondary, what is important is that both campaigns have been willing to campaign separately. I mean, of course, there's always some overlap in these things. Both groups diverge from established gender norms. They're very different views about what that means. But there's probably gay bars had cross-dressing and trans people.
But I certainly think if you were in the more revolutionary camp of the gay rights revolution, you would have seen the campaign for gay rights and the campaign for trans rights as being identical, because the campaign is ultimately a campaign of breaking down heterosexual norms and breaking down all of the other kinds of norms that would restrain people's freedom to do or behave in whatever way that they want.
All norms are suspect.
Now, if that's your camp, and there was definitely a culture around that. You could see this in like drag bars and things like that all the way from the 70s up. I think one of the things that's happened now is that we're kind of looking back at that history and we're framing it now as if all gay rights campaigners were also drag queens, or were heavily involved in a queer culture, that where in fact there was quite raucous disagreement within the gay rights movement over whether or not that was the correct tactic.
Because the queer side of it really rejected gay marriage, and it was notable that activists were much less into the gay marriage campaign than civilian gays who supported it overwhelmingly, and even Stonewall in the UK, because activists are never representative, was really reluctant to get on board with gay marriage until they found out that their supporters and members and contributors were 20 to 1 in favour of it, and they had to adapt. So I think there's been a lot of airbrushing of the radical resistance to gay marriage out of it, not least because half the radicals who said they hated marriage are now married.
Yeah, that's right. But they're open marriages, so they're...
Maybe. But I do think Andrew Sullivan has said a lot of that he got such abuse from people who he now again reads their wedding notice and goes, well, thanks for the apology I never got. But,
and we've seen a similar thing happen in the trans rights movement as well, where, almost all of the really, really big wins, particularly at the European level, have been tied very specifically to what was historically called post-operative transsexuals. It was people who understood themselves as having a medical condition and who advocated on the basis that they needed healthcare, medical care in the form of surgery and other kinds of radical medical intervention in order to alleviate, not necessarily to affirm their identity, but to alleviate the psychological suffering that they were experiencing. And it was the humane thing to do in order to alleviate that suffering, was to provide them with that medical treatment. And then once you'd provided people with this medical treatment, particularly from the state, this was an important thing in Goodwin, the NHS funded this surgery. It was at that point that they said, hang on, if you're funding the surgeries and you're letting us go through this, you have to give us the thing that we need at the very end of that, which is recognition on state documentation, because otherwise you're creating the discordance that exists between the lived experience of a post-operative transsexual and their documented reality. And it was that discordance that was used to push for an expansion. And that was also why the marriage rights were confined to post-operative transsexuals, because the claim was that, once you've gone through the surgery, your entire being has shifted. You don't challenge the gender binary anymore. You have moved from being a very effeminate male person or a very masculine female person into being a perfectly gender conforming woman or man, and that was something that led to significant successes. And the thing that has potentially led to the failure or the backlash has been legal and also political moves to adopt the more revolutionary stance, and to say this isn't about this narrow commitment to a normal way of thinking about sex and gender. This is about destroying all norms that relate to sex and gender. And in many ways, that's where the real backlash that you can get in a lot of contexts is when you, particularly if you're male, when you do something that's really gender non-conforming, wearing a dress and having a beard. That's not acceptable in a lot of contexts. And that's where I think some of the kind of more queer side of the trans element has pushed. So you get this shift from transsexual into transgender and then trans or gender identity. And you can see, I think, even within contemporary debates within the trans movement, that there's the same kind of split happening, although I think it's a much more imbalanced split than there might have been in the gay rights movement, where you have people who would consider themselves to be transsexual on the one hand and saying, this is where we're committed to, a particular framework of rights, and then people who would think themselves trans or transgender on the other hand, and them seeing things like self-identification being a really important legal win. And this was certainly something that I experienced when I was an undergraduate student in 2012 to 2016. I did an exchange program at the University of Hong Kong, and I took a course there, Human Rights in Practice. And as a part of that course, we provided practical advice, legal advice to human rights organizations and charities in and around that region. And this would have been about 2014, 2015. And one of the organizations that we were advising was a Chinese-based trans rights organization. And we actually found it very difficult to advise the organization because at the time that we had built this link, there was an internal civil war happening in the organization between the old school transsexuals and the more transgender focus. And I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if part of that divide was between slightly more westernized or Americanized advocacy happening within some parts of the organization, and then another part that was, there might have been an intergenerational thing. I think it was the older members that were in the more transsexual camp, and that created a huge tension at that time. I don't know if that tension is still happening in China at the moment, but certainly when we were advising there, we could see that happening in real time, and I think it tracked some of the debates that happened in.
And because in the
UK.
book I've written about the tensions between LGB and LGBTQ plus rights, but you're right. I think you're really right to point out that there's equal or at least also significant tension between T and TQ plus, because it's about increasing the cost of accommodation. If you say there's a small number of people who have gender dysphoria, who are suffering because of that, don't fire anyone because of that. Don't harass them. Let them go about most 98% of their lives and be treated as the sex they wish they were. That's a low cost option. But as you say, once it gets to TQ plus and it says, well, actually, accommodating us requires you to junk very fundamental definitions. What a man is. That mean a lot to people. What a man is, what a woman is. All norms around gender and sex. The cost is rising and rising. And then also as the TQ plus approach will be much more accommodating of very visibly non-conforming to the sex that they identify with, being in single-sex spaces again, which raises the cost higher and higher and higher. And that's what is really sad, I think, for trans rights, is that's what has really hurt them, because the numbers have been going in the wrong direction across the West for last few years, and things that were becoming uncontroversial.
When you say numbers, you mean the
public support? Yes, the numbers of percentage of support for things that used to have quite high recognition support, even like having gender recognition certificates or things like that. They're all dropping because I think they've been discredited because, well, put it this way, the opponents of trans rights and the opponents of gay rights always say accommodating these people requires you to junk many of your cherished norms. And LGBTQ plus groups have been making that case for them. They've been saying, yes, indeed, you're right. Accommodating these tiny groups requires you to junk all of your norms, and it's a disaster. So pushing, I don't know, I mean, for toilets, I suspect that before self-ID became an issue, there was a kind of not very legally satisfactory, but modus vivendi, where people who kind of passed were people looked the other way, and it just probably used the toilets of the required gender. But once it became a matter of principle and self-ID, that was no longer workable at all. And the law can't really the law is really bad at things like modus vivendi, where you think, well, it's only a couple of people, maybe they pass, I'll look the other way.
Although,
the law is really bad at that.
I mean, one area where the law does have something in this way, maybe not in the sense of like, oh, we'll look the other way, because the law has a requirement for rules to be followed, and sometimes there's exceptions to rules, and that's all that, but it's all kind of worked out as a matter of reason. But a core part of the law in this area, equality and discrimination law, is tied fundamentally to questions of proportionality. And if your argument is this is going to be grossly disproportionate to the rest of society to help a small group of people, that undermines the legal case in a whole bunch of ways. And there's 2 points I'd say about that. I mean, one would be, when the argument was post-operative transsexualism, the legal case was this is a very small number of people who, by virtue of state choices, have engaged in or have gone through a process that has sterilized them and has fundamentally changed their physical body. And what we're asking for in order to provide recognition for that is state documentation. Just give me the pieces of paper.
Because they're kind of marooned after the thing the state did for them. NHS pays for reassignment, they're now marooned.
So that argument, you can see that argument in proportionality terms looking like there's been this massive cost, and you're looking for something that at least on paper is a minor accommodation. Now, if you change that dynamic, if you either say that the piece of paper isn't just about the state recognizing you and your relationships, like marriage certificates, birth certificates, something like that, but it also has wide implications for the rights of others and for society, you've changed the proportionality analysis. Now the cost is significantly higher. Now, my view is that actually most of the case law in the European Court of Human Rights on this doesn't actually think about what the legal consequences of getting one of these certificates is. That's kind of a grey area. They've not really considered that. Most of the cases have been barriers to getting the certificates, and in particular, or conditions on getting the certificates. So do you have to sterilize yourself? Do you have to divorce? Do you have to give up custody of your children? Things like that. But let's just say that the argument that some are advancing, that the right to gender recognition does confer these much broader entitlements than simply the state document. That proportionality analysis, that balancing, gets harder when you've got much more significant costs on one end. But you could still probably run an argument that says, but look at the cost that the individual has had to go through. But we've already moved the dial on the other side quite significantly since then. It's no longer in any way tied to this small cohort of people who've undergone surgical intervention.
Yeah.
It's now prohibited on human rights grounds for you to lock recognition behind a requirement to undergo sterilizing surgery, and I think that's right. I don't think we should have human rights that are locked behind that requirement.
Yeah.
But by opening that, the cohort of people who benefit becomes diluted. And what that means is, and if you did something like self-identification, the actual benefit that's given and the balance that is struck in the proportionality balancing stage starts to look very different.
Yeah.
So you see this in Forum in Scotland, the Supreme Court decision last year that concerned the definition of sex in the Equality Act. One of the things that was relevant for the court's assessment there was that there is no requirement to undergo any kind of medical intervention to get a gender recognition certificate. So the court could say, truthfully, that someone with or without a gender recognition certificate could be completely indistinguishable from another member of their biological sex. So it becomes very hard then to
So self-ID bites bites the case for extensive recognition of trans rights in the ass.
But I think what it does is it shifts the balance that's being done at the proportionality analysis.
Yes.
So, there is a sense in which you've the overextension puts you on less firm ground for the kind of argument that you're making when you're thinking about the balance against the rights of others or the impact on the rights of others.
And that's probably true for gay rights too, in terms of, well, there are things that you do have rights to do in theory that I wouldn't do. Like most of the gay cases, I think gay rights have generally been sold, things like gay marriage, that they're zero cost.
Yeah.
It won't affect your marriage, just let us get married, leave us alone. Same with private gay sex. So if we then insist, say, for instance, on very public sexual nudity and activity, raises the cost. If we are very vigilant in enforcing discrimination laws about gay marriage, wedding cakes and stuff, it raises the cost again. And the one thing I talk about a lot in the book is these corporate schemes we've had, very elaborate, from the Human Rights Campaign in the US and Stonewall in the UK, that effectively interpret being pro-gay as a matter of professional competence.
Yeah.
And also where we move from saying don't persecute us to saying I want flags all month, the whole month of June. I want semi-mandatory ally groups. I want the CEO to have to say I love gays and they're great. Like, A, it's just annoying and needy. B, it won't last. We can already see from Silicon Valley and all this, the corporate stampede away from gay rights. All of these things poke the 96% bear of the straight population and just think, accommodating us is irritating and burdensome. Yeah. And we are ants compared to them. They can squish us.
Just in terms of like just raw numbers.
Raw numbers. Don't, like, any tiny minority like gay people, or even tinier again like trans people, it's not nice, but we have to realise our fate is not in our own hands. Yeah. We're always trying to convince a much bigger group to tolerate us. And that means we need to convince them that they can do that without disrupting cherished beliefs, very fundamental systems, and their way of life.
Yeah.
And I think both trans and gay campaigns, by merging and by adding on Q and plus and making it seem like have an ongoing campaign with no limits, they have made our opponent's case for them.
Yeah.
That
Well, I mean,
we are
part of it-
difficult to accommodate.
Well, part of it is that we're not, or at least the campaigns are not, they're no longer looking for tolerance and accommodation.
No.
You know, we're not demanding that Tesco tolerate gay people. Tesco has to love gay people. It has to commit itself to a much more robust commitment of support when it's a capitalistic organisation.
They will do whatever.
It's not doing it because it really loves us. But I think, one of the points that you draw out that I think is really useful when thinking about this in this kind of wider context is how quickly it's become standards of professional behaviour to adopt and express certain views. And you see this not just in terms of vocal and public support for gay rights, but you also see a lot of people think that putting pronouns in your email signature is a professional thing to do, rather than being a campaigning thing to do. Like, if you ask most people who have pronouns in their email signatures, when did you join a trans rights advocacy campaign, they would say, what are you talking about? And then you say, well, you've put your pronouns in your signature. They're not going to be thinking that was an act of public declaration of my support for particular rights claims. They'll think that was just the corporate professional
I'm with
thing
it.
to do.
And subconsciously they're saying, I'm showing I'm with it. I'm showing I'm on the ball. I'm
Yeah.
showing I'm a sharp kind of, I know the kind of cutting edge standards of behaviour.
Yeah.
And also even with the Tesco thing, I just think that it just seems so, we wouldn't ask Tesco to say we love us if we didn't really doubt it.
Yeah.
And the reality is that although anti-gay feelings are much lower, for most people, I think persecution in the West, I think most persecution of gay people seems kind of pointless and strange thing to do. However, I think we would be wrong not to think that there is some level on which homosexuality still makes a lot of people a little queasy. They're not homophobic, but most men and women, part of how they understand themselves as a man and woman is by being attracted to the other sex. And that's how they make sense of their lives. It's just a little strange for them.
Yeah.
And I think by demanding that, we know that, and that's sad, we'll always be a little bit on the outside. And by demanding that corporations say we love you, we love you, love you, we're kind of like, we're poking the bear, but we're also kind of, we're only doing it because we know it's not true.
Yeah.
I mean,
you're right that depending on what circle you're swimming in, you might find the expression of homophobia or misogyny just completely beyond the pale. It's just not in your circle. And then you think that's how everybody believes, or that's what everyone thinks. There's definitely, I think, a connection there in the sense that, there's that old joke that homophobia is the fear that gay men are going to treat you the way you treat women. And if you're very, very misogynistic towards women and you see them as sex objects, you're concerned about being sexually objectified by gay men, because that's what you do to the object of your sexual desire. And that makes you feel very uncomfortable and you lash out with anger. So there's definitely a connection there. But I think there's a broader point to draw out from this, which I think is potentially, if I could be so bold as to posit a theme for your book. But I think what you're cautioning us is that it is more important to be effective than to be seen to be doing the right thing. And often those two things are in conflict with one another. Often, the pronouns are not effective. Putting pronouns on your email signature doesn't...
It's actually counterproductive.
It's counterproductive. Getting Tesco to tell you it loves you every month or every year for a month is counterproductive, but it is seen to be doing the right thing or to be saying the right thing. And often I think there's an obsession with ideological purity among social activist groups, that it's far more important to be pure in your views than to make gains. So a lot of the gay rights campaigners who were anti same-sex marriage were anti-same-sex marriage because they had a purity of belief about marriage and about heteronormativity. Yeah. And they said, I don't care if some of my gay friends disagree with me and would like to get married. I cannot taint my political advocacy here. I will not campaign for gay marriage because I don't support marriage. And that's saying that I will be more focused on being seen to have the right views in my mind than to make gains. Even if, for example, you told them, just on a hypothetical, that if you get gay marriage, that will help destroy marriage, which, you know, some conservatives thought absolutely would be the case. And even if you convince them of that, there'd be a lot of campaigners who, they're not campaigning because they want to change the world. They're campaigning because they want to publicly advocate for their own views, what they think is the right way for the world to be.
A vision of themselves as the most radical, the most pure, and they've judged many people for being less radical than them in the past, and they fear the judgment of others if they appear to be not to be the most radical, known to my left or known to my right. These purity spirals.
And what's happening there is that the point of campaigning then is completely narcissistic. The point of campaigning is to prove to yourself and others that you have the right views. It's not to actually bring about any change.
No.
Which is why you get so many of these organisations where they're like, why hasn't the local council in Sussex decried the war in Gaza? And you're like, well, what are they going to be able to do? Just, you know, like now Netanyahu's going to listen.
But I do remember when I was like young, a student and things, part of it also is the feeling of wanting to be a participant. Like you're watching the news and you think, oh, I'm just sitting on, I was living in Ireland, small country, nothing much, global politics aren't happening there. But if you want to get Killarney Urban District Council to pass a resolution on the Middle East, you feel like, oh, I can be part of it. I can see the people on the news and I feel camaraderie because I'm part of these big world movements. And it's exciting, it's kind of slightly self-aggrandizing.
Yeah.
But I guess activism tends to attract those.
It's inclusion within a movement, regardless of whether it achieves anything.
Yeah, and campus things, like we all have to get the university to say X or not say X or to say Y. It gives students who, you're still at the start of their lives and their careers, and the big world feels very exciting but inaccessible. It gives you a chance to kind of slightly touch that world. I understand the impulse, but maybe what we need, I think partly maybe what's happened is, I write a lot in the book about the baby boomer generation who were rebels in 1968 and still wanted to be rebels when they were the CEOs and the prime ministers and thing. And I think what maybe has broken down in the system is that older people have not wanted to be the adults anymore. They wanted to be in the powerful jobs, but they didn't want to take the bad bit, which you have to sometimes say no.
Yeah.
And I think
you see this with parenting a lot.
Parenting, you see it in universities, you see it in a lot of organizations. It used to be the case that when you achieve kind of high status in an organization, that was great for you, but the downside was you were no longer in the rebel crowd and the in crowd. You were the fuddy-duddy who had to say no. And I see a lot of now the tendency is people, they want to be both the CEO and the rebel at the same time. Yeah. And by not stepping up to their adult responsibilities in order, say, activist organizations, they've allowed themselves to be led by Twitter mobs or their most radical followers. Because it's painful to say, no, I'm the fuddy-duddy.
Yeah, well, particularly if you've been I think this is something that an organisation like Stonewall has had to deal with. They've spent the last 10 years whipping up fury among their supporters and, claiming that there's an existential threat that needs to be addressed immediately or everything is going to fall apart. And now they're trying to pivot towards being the leaders of a contentious debate, that they can be the adult in the room. Yes. But it's very hard for them to do that if their core supporters have, at their own insistence, been treating this as an existential threat for their existence. It's
very hard to walk it back. I think that, right, if you say our opponents are evil and want, to hurt people, and some of their opponents are
Do you?
like
Yeah, yeah,
that,
yeah.
and I wouldn't discount that. There's not totally unreasonable, but once you have apocalyptic rhetoric, it's so hard to walk it back.
Yeah.
Um,
And it's dangerous. I mean, this is the kind of thing that I think can lead people into contemplating self harm.
yeah,
You know, it used to, the campaign used to be "It Gets Better," and that was a campaign to push, you know, particularly young, vulnerable gay teenagers to not give up on
yeah.
their life. And now the campaign is it's only going to get worse.
Yeah, and if we don't get these legal things that we're asking for, which are controversial,
You might as well
have
kill
no
yourself.
you have no hope. Yeah, you have
Yeah.
no future. It's a terrible message.
Yeah.
And even it would have been a terrible message for gay people in, in 1980 to be told, if we don't get gay marriage, your life is terrible, and
Yeah.
you got to live in the world you're in.
Yeah.
And if you were a gay person in 1980, when you're a gay man, you've got something terrible about to happen. But even taking that aside, you were going to live for the next 25 years without any chance of getting married, and you had to do the best life that you could in those circumstances. And lots of people did they had okay lives. They would have better.
This isn't the end of the discussion. Ronan and I spoke for about another hour about themes that were related to the book, particularly digging into some of the other potential threats to the gay rights revolution. So we had a long discussion about the role that anything goes sexual morality might have, or sexual practice might have, in potentially resulting in undermining of the gay rights movement. We also spoke about whether there are ways to make sense of the gay rights movement that don't tie themselves to this kind of anything goes approach to morality and sexual morality. And in particular, we discussed whether there were alternative ways to ground gay rights. So whether we could think about gay rights as being necessary for human flourishing, rather than just about kind of freedom to do what people should be free to do. So if you'd like to listen to that further hour of conversation, you can head over to Knowing Use on Substack and subscribe.